Hey everyone! Before we dive in, I just want to say thanks for your patience and support. If you enjoy my videos, then please subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, hit that bell notification icon, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. And now, on with the show.
Oh, I've never turned in a book even a minute late, and this one has been overdue since I left for Ponyville!
Hold the slightly implied to exist phone! Why do I feel like I've been here before? Checking my memory for cartoon plot lines. Searching. Searching. Searching! Aha! Bingo! Though these aren't the same story, I am familiar with the shared premise. So just for fun, let's do a little compare and contrast between Twilight Sparkle's quest to return a book and Bill and Ted's adventure to meet a pair of authors. I suppose some context is in order. With all the reboots, sequels, pre-sequel reboots, and hard resets in Hollywood, it's pretty common to say that they're out of ideas. But if you were watching Saturday morning cartoons back in the day, you'd realize that's been a problem for a while. Plenty of movies got their own cartoon series. Sometimes it worked well, like with The Real Ghostbusters or Men in Black. I'd argue that the TV series were actually better than the movie sequels. Then you got cartoons like Free Willy. There is no follow-up to that. I feel it is self-explanatory. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventures falls somewhere in the middle. It continues the story of Bill S. Preston and Ted Theodore Logan, two aspiring rockers who don't know that their music will pave the way to an idealistic society. World peace, environmental restoration, access to alien worlds. They're basically the opposite of Death Clock.
We are the most brutal band in the world.
Be excellent to each other.
Go forth and die!
Party on, dudes!
To ensure this grand future, the time-traveling agent Rufus grants them a machine disguised as a public telephone booth.
What?
And they gallivant through time, meeting friends and foes.
What?
Plus, in the sequel movie, they get to meet some aliens, battle evil cybernetic replicas, and even cheat death.
What?
That's the grand thing about storytelling. Depending on the crafting, similar elements can produce a wildly different tale. And there's some grand humor running through all this because these two chuckleheads are some of the least likely world saviors, which only makes it more fun. By contrast, if we're going to watch a chosen one or destined individual story, Twilight Sparkle is the kind of character I'd like to watch. She's intelligent and sometimes proud, but also kind and empathetic. She's eager to learn, curious about the world, and able to function on her own or in a group. Despite some low points, I've enjoyed the idea of her being in charge. Now that she's about to assume the throne, it's nice to have a romp where she gets to tackle her own personal issue, along with an oft-celebrated cameo.
We just had a really heavy delivery today.
I don't know if our dear Muffin Mare's first speaking role would have sparked as much controversy if it were more like this. Some slapstick and interaction, but no hostility. Oh, and we get the return of the Spike burp.
Really? She couldn't have put it into the box?
And to miss a chance to harken back to earlier seasons? I think not. But all's not well as there's a library book that's long overdue, by an undisclosed passage of time. I still think that the very first episode on through Princess Twilight takes place within 1 year. After that, I'm not so sure. Equestria always seems to work on an accelerated timetable, so events I would expect to take months happen in mere days. Regardless, I have no idea just how long that book is overdue. Twilight has a list of concerns around this, including monetary.
I didn't even think about the late fine.
Which is where we jump back to Bill and Ted and their episode, A Grim Story of an Overdue Book. A similar problem sets the stage for their central conflict.
Theodore A. Logan, you're charged with not returning a library book. A violation of Section 475.3 of the Dewey Decimal System.
That's not how the Dewey Decimal System works. We all know its true purpose is to aid an alien brain invasion.
Your decimal system has played right into my hands.
You checked out Little Red Riding Hood by the Brothers Grimm 10 years ago and never returned it. Total fines and penalties add up to over $35,000.
Huh. By contrast, Twilight's late fees can't be that bad.
A book out this long will probably cost 1,000 bits.
Now see, if you take the current value of the bit, average it against the trade values of other countries, adapt for inflation and run through the current stock value, that comes to... heck if I know, because this is all just a step away from Monopoly money. As outlandish as all this sounds, real life will always be that much stranger. A man in Cooper's Cove of Central Texas faced jail time for a 3-year overdue GED study guide. Another man in Des Moines, Iowa spent over a week in jail for failing to return over $770 worth of library books and CDs. And as recently as 2019, a woman in Charlotte, Michigan lost out on a promotion and went on suspension because the library issued a warrant for her 2-year late fee. Those overdue books? Where the Sidewalk Ends and Night. The late fees were $72.30. The possible legal fines? 93 days in jail or paying $500. But here's where the first real comparison comes into play. Who is the comedy source in these stories? While Bill and Ted may have comedic surfer boy mannerisms, they are the least comedic element. Instead, much of the absurdity lies with the historical figures they encounter, like George Washington.
This is George Washington live at Valley Forge. Now back to you, Chet.
Or Davy Crockett.
Remember the Alamo!
Davy Crockett died defending the Alamo. It's part of why the saying became a rallying cry. Yeah, if you're looking for historical accuracy, Saturday morning cartoons were not the way to go. But the point remains that the comedy for this show mostly lies in meeting absurdist characters in history. Bill and Ted are proxies for the audience, representing the current perspective. By contrast, Twilight is the absurdist character, trying to sneak her way through everyday Canterlot.
I'm the princess of friendship. Everywhere I go, ponies recognize me.
I still remember Season 4, Twilight. Pony powers of perception pivot perilously upon plurality.
Princess Twilight! So good to see you!
Ah, well, that's some progress. Instead, the audience's representation comes through Spike in his commentary. As ever, he is a good counterpart to Twilight.
You sniff books?
Do you not?
But this isn't the norm, because one librarian shakes up the whole dynamic.
Oh, wow. Yeesh.
After 8 whole seasons of Twilight Nanas, I've gotten used to the sight. But getting to see other ponies matching her reaction? That's a new one.
You need to go and see First Folio in the grossly overdue book return office for ponies who should know better.
One sec, Twilight. This requires an effective application of passive aggression. Oh, I'm so very sorry that Princess Twilight Sparkle, future ruler of Equestria, forgot to return a book while saving the world from eternal night. Goodness knows that a late collection of dead trees is far more odious than eternal night. Since you're a fan of reading, why not read the flavor text on this card? Nightmare Moon would have burnt a whole library of books to make sure that the sun could never be raised. A horrible act, but I can't fault it for villainous efficacy. Plus, all those book fires would at least have made for an okay reading light during eternal night. But really, I am grateful for this shift, as Twilight goes from being the sole oddball to trying to navigate an even more eccentric world. Spike is still our proxy while also being a voice for Twilight's own conscience. But now it's not simply a Twilight meltdown. We're learning about a rather intensive subculture alongside her. Twilight's obsession goes from a comedic aspect to a driving force as she searches Canterlot for First Folio, who has the authority to end this challenge. This includes a trip to Restaurant Row and the Tasty Treat. While it's unfortunate we don't get a cameo by Saffron Marsala and Coriander Kumar, it is good to see their restaurant so healthily attended. Shows that Pinky and Rarely's efforts weren't wasted. So, who's in attendance?
Moon Dancer, how have you been?
Moondancer is rather critical as she and First Folio relay that the former head librarian had to retire after her perfect return record was ruined. It's a parallel to Moondancer's own difficulty after feeling shunned. Turns out Twilight's departure for Ponyville was a monumental event in more ways than 2. And again, we're faced with a seemingly absurdist response to a late book, but real life provides a contrast. To quote Sue Padilla, director of the Newton Library, "We try to be good stewards of those things that were purchased with taxpayer funds." There's a real push and pull debate on how to handle late books that represent an investment. Texas, for example, has reported over $18 million worth of lost library materials. This is still, I think, an exaggeration, but it's surprising how close it mirrors real life, though this revelation causes a shift in Twilight's goals. One of Twilight's recurring flaws is that she tends to link her sense of self, often referred to as the ego, to her roles or accomplishments. She sees herself as intelligent, so she couldn't accept being unable to explain Pinky Sense. She was Celestia's star pupil, so missing a friendship report was too great a blow. When she became Princess of Friendship, she started to expect herself to have all the answers or to fulfill all missions. Thus, she would even go so far as Grand Theft Pearl. This perfect library record is yet another example.
She had a perfect librarian record until one careless pony didn't return a book, ruined it all.
Dang! Canterlot librarians are hardcore. I used to think Twilight's perfectionism came from trying to live up to her perception of Celestia. Given what I'm seeing with these Canterlot ponies, I wonder if it's more of a cultural pressure. After all, they're bombarding her with the message that it's all Twilight's fault. So now we're following Twilight on a mystery as she tries to find out where Dusty Pages moved after leaving the library.
She moved to Silver something. Shoals, Seas, Surfer, whatever.
Thank you. Meathead Pony? Wow, the staff sure shortchanged him. But hang on, Silver Shoals? Where have I heard that before?
I, for one, am looking forward to a little R&R. Maybe a trip to Silver Shoals.
I'm not going to make assumptions, but I am going to pocket that idea for later. Regardless, now it's no longer Twilight being the oddball in a marginally sane world. Instead, she's stepping into the unknown alongside Spike, and we're along for the ride, which mirrors Bill and Ted's journey, at least in the setup. In a show about time travel, one would think that Bill and Ted would squirrel the book away from Ted's younger self and return it for him, but the rules state that they can't interfere with their own timeline, even though that is exactly what they did in the movie. So much like Twilight, they venture into unfamiliar territory and seek to acquire a copy of the Red Riding Hood from the Brothers Grimm themselves.
Makes sense to me.
Problem is that this presentation of the brothers features them at odds and on the verge of being arrested. So they flee into the time stream, meeting the aforementioned historical figures and nearly getting the Brothers Grimm either captured or killed several times.
Must find a way to rescue the Grimms, or they will never write my missing library book.
And time will also unravel since you two just displaced two keynote figures. But Bill and Ted are very singularly minded. Don't get me wrong, they can be fun to watch, but Twilight is both fun and interesting because her motives evolve. So with no clear destination in sight, they visit every Silver location they can imagine, even Silver Stream. Although for some reason they skipped me. I can't imagine why. But eventually the two make their way to Silver Stables community. And I am so relieved that this is not the Silver Shoals of which Princess Luna spoke. She may be retiring, but I think she's a good couple of centuries away from a retirement home where they have plein air painting, windsurfing, yoga, woodworking, band practice, fruit war zones. Okay, you know what? Forget what I said. If I live long enough to reach retirement, this is where I want to go. This is so refreshing to see. More often than not, I see a cynical take on getting older and being in a retirement community.
All day long, we'd play bingo, eat oatmeal, and wait for our children to call.
This senior center has given us all something besides death to look forward to.
I've made jokes about getting older as well, but there are times where I wonder if we're being way too negative about living a long life. This episode doesn't skimp on some jokes about the elderly, including random nap time, but also goes a long way to show that getting older isn't the end of an adventure. And when Twilight finally meets Dusty Pages, she starts to learn something.
Now I'm not afraid to try things I might fail at. In fact, sometimes messing up teaches me more than getting it right.
Which leads to a big lesson, preceded by a sub-lesson. Don't let a goal obscure what's right before you.
Perfection. The impossible pursuit.
Wow, what kind of series would this have been if Twilight actually read that book? Regardless, it's here where we get to talk about the theme of unintended consequences. Twilight committed 2 errors the day she left, yet the pony's reactions were polar opposites. Moondancer went into seclusion and needed some help to admit her feelings and work through them. Dusty Pages felt a thrill and began to embrace life and failure, and is now providing the lesson to Twilight. In both cases, I don't think you can fully blame or credit Twilight. There was no malice in missing Moondancer's party or forgetting that library book. It's more a study of how even a small axe can ripple throughout both culture and time. Speaking of time, Bill and Ted had their own unintended consequences. Getting imprisoned by George Washington at Valley Forge leads to some strange inspiration.
They're all pretty grumpy, sleepy, and that one was dopey even before he joined on.
What possible inspiration could you derive from a snow-white Fraulein and 7 short soldiers living in the woods like this?
Subtle. Well, how about when they get attacked by a bear and saved by Davy Crockett?
A story about a bear. He lives in a house in the woods.
Then whisked into the far future.
The bear and the 3 most important people.
Last but not least, they meet Lady Godiva. She is clothed in a red cloak and hood, and judging by her feet and bare legs, along with the legend around her, not much else. Wow, they're running with this. For those who don't know, Lady Godiva, the Countess of Mercia, opposed her husband's brutal taxation so much that he made a deal. He would remit all the tolls if, and only if, she rode through the town of Coventry completely naked. Lady Godiva accepted this public humiliation, bidding that all the townfolk stay indoors and close their shutters. The people recognized that she was doing this on their behalf and obeyed. Knowing that, this line isn't terribly funny.
Sorry, your most bodacious buffness!
Bill and Ted should count their blessings. A tailor by the name of Thomas stole a look at Lady Godiva and was struck blind by the wrath of heaven. I can't tell if I should be upset at this casual voyeurism, this is, after all, the legend that coined the phrase peeping Tom, or if I should be impressed at how they got this past the censors.
Little Red Riding Cape!
Maybe it's good that Bill and Ted aren't the brightest bulbs, because this whole story is a love song to predeterminism. Anyway, while the external events have been high on absurdist and cartoonish danger, the emotional conflict has been between Wilhelm and Jacob Ludwig Karl. One wants to write folk tales, the other wants to bore folks.
We write books about grammar, like this one, Famous Verbs in History.
While I may not get outraged about how badly the show represents actual history, I do feel the need to clarify this. The Brothers Grimm did not invent folk tales. They collected them as part of an academic and romantic nationalism endeavor. The brothers believed that a folklore collection, once a declining oral tradition, could help support a sense of a national identity. So, I think they predicted sports fans, wrestling fans, Trekkies, Whovians, Potterheads, Star Wars fans, browncoats, bronies, and much, much more way in advance. The brothers were themselves librarians, writers, and teachers. They did work on grammar and dictionary publications, but didn't look down on folk tales. If anything, I think they understood that stories are vessels for ideas. An idea is pure and powerful and often too brilliant to be seen unadorned. We'd go as blind as that peeping Tom. So what do? We craft stories. We clothe them in characters, situations, and conflicts so that the core idea can be witnessed. And what are the core ideas between these two takes on the late library book story? Well, let's consider a few things. Both feature a culture that takes book lending very seriously, partly for comedic effect, but also reflecting a real-life conflict that isn't often discussed. Both feature a far-reaching journey and encountering eccentric personalities. Both address the concept of unintended consequences, and yet I would not say that they are the same story, mostly owing to how the characters grow or fail to do so. Bill and Ted don't so much mend the rift between brothers as they simply turn it off through a misunderstanding.
It will only be most outstanding if you put a grandmother in it.
There will be grammar in it?
And that's all it takes. The brothers write Little Red Riding Hood, and Bill and Ted return to the library with the time-displaced first edition.
This is the original handwritten manuscript.
Of course, since it's freshly printed, it wouldn't look anything like what a modern-day librarian would accept as genuine. But it clears the debts and leaves Bill and Ted free to go on their way, until...
Bill S. Preston, Esquire. 12 years ago, he checked out Poopsie Whoopsie and the Itsy Bitsy Bunny Rabbit.
I look at Bill and Ted, and I find that they haven't changed a bit over this story. They didn't learn anything about cooperation, endurance, courage, or humility from these historical figures, absurdist as they may be. So the real core idea I see here is that a past mistake will gain size over time and come back to ruin you. The only reason Bill and Ted make it out unscathed is because they are the chosen ones. Unless we dismiss it because the cartoon was inspired by a comedy, I want to point out that the movie did at least hint at change.
We traveled through time. I mean, we met lots of great leaders, and look at us. Nothing's different. Maybe we should start learning how to play.
I think a character, even in a comedy, should emerge at least slightly changed from where they started. Like Twilight, who still has to face down a library fine.
How much do I owe now?
Abacus?
You don't want to know.
Unlike Bill and Ted, Twilight doesn't have an out. She's just got to face the consequences and pay her dues.
Most ponies don't know it caps at a month. Probably because we don't tell them.
Amazing. All that drama and implied shaming, but they don't go for the wallet.
Letting the perfection go.
This is not the end of Twilight's struggle with her recurring flaw. She's going to have to stop linking her ego in other ways, such as winning a trivia contest or believing that, as princess, she has to know and handle everything. It's not a case of one lesson changing your whole life. But with each experience, Twilight changes in small ways, which add up and culminate in the series finale. Here and now, I found Twilight's quest fun, and the same is true for Bill and Ted. Their excellent adventure embraces absurdity, so I can't get too invested in historical accuracy, though not all the jokes hit home. Twilight's own quest doesn't reach the same level of ridiculousness, but I enjoy it more because it stays on target with this theme and actually conveys a lot of positive ideas. Ideas like getting older is nothing to fear, perfection is unattainable, and mistakes can be the best teachers. And even a negative outcome may not be as bad as envisioned. Add to that the chance to check in with some familiar characters, and Spike's role as a supporter and advisor. It's a very enjoyable journey. Not the standout of the season, but definitely worth a watch. Though I'm left with one dangling question. Now that Twilight is no longer best book borrower, who's number one? There are some things you can't question, Moondancer. She's one of them. I'm Silver-Quill. Thanks for watching.